The Iriali are probably the most Cosmere-aware human civilization on Roshar, with a religion that predicts the restoration of the One. And as I go through the first arc of the Stormlight Archive, and kind of the various clues to Adonalsium, I thought I'd be remiss if I don't talk about the Iriali specifically, including what their religion shows and what it may portend for the future of the shards. And it's not quite as simple as the restoration of Adonalsium. In this video, I'm going to walk through who the Iriali are, what we know about them, how they world hop straight out of Roshar, and what that may mean for the Cosmere. But this video will include spoilers for all of the Stormlight Archive up through the end of Wind and Truth. I want to do a future video that will also include spoilers for Mistborn Era 2 because I think that may have some relevance to the Iriali, but I'll save that for part 2 of this video. But with that, let's get into it. But let's start with who the Iriali are and what makes them so Cosmere aware. First, it's crystal clear to me that they are not native to Roshar and instead are basically nomadic world hoppers as a civilization. Roshar is the fourth planet that it appears that the Iriali have traveled to, because by the end of Wind and Truth, what we see is them undertaking what they term as the fifth journey, and the time for them to find the fifth land somewhere else in the Cosmere. And they do so through essentially a perpendicularity that a Kusikish, a giant spren that they worship, form that lead them to Shadesmar and enable them to travel off-world. Second, and I think this may be a little controversial, but I think their physical appearance suggests some connection to deity. The Iriali are repeatedly described over the course of the Stormlight Archive as a people with golden hair. And Sanderson takes some pains to point out that golden hair does not mean the same as having blonde hair. In fact, it's something separate with a metallic sheen, and that distinction is important because it gives them this kind of otherworldly suggestion to them. And colors are really important. I want to do a video about colors in Stormlight Archive, but gold in particular is associated with Odium, actually. He appears in one of the visions, he appears as he is Iriali with golden hair when he's speaking to Taravangian, and it's often the motif that he chooses to use. And the Iriali do have some connection to Odium, of course. Like over the course of the Stormlight Archive, they're the civilization that really quite quickly sided with Odium, for reasons that appear to have been more about political expediency than anything, but isn't fully explained. And so I do think they have this deific connection, whether that's to Odium or another shard, I'm not quite sure yet. And third, their worship system appears to have some sort of tie back to the shattering of Adonalsium. While they sided with Odium, as I just talked about, over the course of the Stormlight Archive, their religion does not worship Odium. They believe in something known as the One, and basically believe that all humans are basically the One experiencing itself. All humans are basically different minds of a single organism experiencing different lives. And we know this primarily from a cobbler, an Iriali cobbler named Yim, who we see in the interludes across the 5 books. And Yim explains that long ago there was only the One. The One knew everything, but experienced nothing. And so the One became many, us people, and the One is both male and female and did so to experience all things. And that is very similar to one interpretation of what happened to the shattering of Adonalsium, which is that rather than being killed, he had some agency, Adonalsium had some agency and made the decision to give up power willingly in order to experience human lives and human suffering. And I talk about that a little bit more in a separate video that I'll link to about Noden in particular. Another interpretation for what the One is in the Iriali religion is not so much that it refers to Adonalsium, but could actually refer to something that existed pre-Adonalsium that created all things. And specifically the reason I say that is that Yim says, long ago there was only one, and one became many, became among us people. And that could suggest that there was something that existed prior to the creation of all things. And then Adonalsium was kind of ended up being the shepherd for those things that prior pre-Adonalsium one had created. And by the way, that's not that different from what Wit believes, actually. In fact, at the end of, I think it was the Words of Radiance, Wit finds Yasna, and he says, and they argue a little bit about like the nature of God, basically, and he explains it, that she'll find God, basically, in the same place that she's going to find salvation from the mess that is Roshar, which is inside the hearts of men. So if we accept the premise that the Iriali have some sort of privileged insight into the past and maybe the future events of the Cosmere, which I know is a big if, then I think the outgrowth could give us a little bit of insight into what may happen to the future of the shards. And specifically what I'll say is what Yim explains is that as the Iriali kind of world hop across these planets, this forms basically a long trail, and at the end of the long trail, he says, eventually all will be gathered back in when the seventh land is attained, and we will once again become one. So if Roshar is the fourth land, and at the end of Wind and Truth, the Iriali travel to the fifth land, that basically means we're only like 2 planetary travels away from like something crazy happening according to the Iriali religion. And I think there's like many different ways to interpret this, but you know, one interpretation could be like this entire process of the long trail is like the Iriali's kind of long cultural remembrance of Adonalsium or whatever may have existed pre-Adonalsium. Another interpretation is that it could, you know, predict the restoration, of course, of Adonalsium and combining back into the one, the shards, the 16 shards combining back into a one. But either way, in my mind, honestly, is that I think Sanderson is using the Iriali not so much to talk about like what may happen in the future, but instead to explore this idea that having a clear destination, a clear righteous potentially destination, brings risks with it. And we know that the Iriali religion has this fatalism associated with it. If all things are basically just a combination of different types of experiences, the one having different types of experiences, then it doesn't necessarily mean that some experiences are good or bad. It's all just different facets of the same thing. And to me, this could lead to a level of fatalism, as I said. We saw that in how quickly the Iriali were willing to side with Odium, for example, which is like rather than try to shape that destiny, I think they kind of were willing to accept Odium as the new power and the fused as the new power, which I think is an outgrowth of what happens when you have the sense of inevitability playing out over the course of a longer term journey. And I think to me, like, this kind of runs counter to the entire idea of like journey before destination, which is, to me, means that like you can shape your own journey rather than assuming that there is a single destination that you'll get to. So all of this to say, I think, is that it'll be interesting to see whether the Iriali belief system around the restoration of the one is coming true or will come true. As I said, I'm not convinced, and there's different interpretations one way or the other. It'll also, I think, really be interesting to see whether, from the Iriali perspective, whether their pursuit of the restoration of the one will cause them to do some pretty nasty things in the next planet that they travel to. And that leads me, I think, to the third point in the future video, which is where have they traveled to and what are they up to there. But I'll save that for a future video. So with that, thanks everyone. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of content, please hit like and please subscribe. It really does help out the channel.